Clara's diner had always been a quiet little place, the kind of spot where everyone knew each other and the smell of coffee felt like comfort. Mornings were her favorite time, when the sunlight spilled across the checkered floor and the world seemed slow and soft. She liked to take her time arranging the tables, making sure every chair was straight and brewing the first pot of coffee just right. It wasn't much, just a small diner on the edge of town, but it was hers. Every corner of the place carried a memory. The faded photograph of her father on the wall, the chipped mugs her mother had given her, the little bell over the door that jingled when someone came in. On that particular morning, Clara moved around the diner as usual, flipping pancakes, pouring coffee, and exchanging small talk with her regulars. There was Mr. Higgins, who always ordered eggs over easy with a side of bacon, and old Mrs. Peters, who liked her coffee black and her stories long. Clara liked that her customers felt like family, and she felt the same in return. The hum of the refrigerator, the sizzle of the grill, and the occasional laughter of someone enjoying a joke made her diner feel alive. The calm of the morning was suddenly interrupted by the deep rumble of a motorcycle engine. It started softly, almost distant, but quickly grew louder until it filled the air around the diner. Clara looked up from the grill, wiping her hands on her apron. Out in the parking lot, a man was pulling in on a massive black Harley. He wore a leather jacket covered in patches, the kind she had only seen in movies or on television. His helmet reflected the morning sun, and there was a confidence in the way he swung his leg over the bike that made it clear he belonged to a world very different from hers. Clara felt a flicker of curiosity mixed with caution. The man climbed off the bike, his boots making a heavy sound against the concrete. He looked around briefly, scanning the diner, then removed his helmet, revealing a face that was rough around the edges but not unkind. Something about him made Clara pause, a strange mix of fear and recognition. She knew from the patches on his jacket that he was a member of the Hells Angels, one of those infamous biker clubs that people whispered about but rarely saw up close. As he walked toward the diner, the distant wail of sirens grew louder. Clara's eyes went to the road. 2 police cars were speeding down the street, tires screeching as they turned sharply into the parking lot. The officers jumped out, their voices loud and commanding. "Hey, stop right there!" The biker froze, hands raised slightly, but he didn't run. Clara's heart began to race. She had never been in a situation like this before. People in her town were careful not to get involved with the law or with anyone connected to the biker world. But something in her stirred, a strange sense of responsibility. She moved toward the entrance, standing between the police and the man. "Please," she said firmly, raising her hands slightly as if to hold them back. "This is my diner. He hasn't done anything here. You can't just come in and make trouble." The officers hesitated. They looked at her, then at the biker, then back at her. Clara could see the tension in their bodies, the way their hands hovered near their belts. She didn't step back. She stood her ground, her voice calm but unwavering. "I run this diner. You're welcome to ask him questions outside, but you will not arrest him here. Not in front of my customers." The biker seemed surprised by her courage. Clara could feel his eyes on her, watching her with a mix of relief and respect. He didn't make a move, didn't try to fight or flee. He simply stayed still, trusting her instinct that had led him here. For a moment it seemed like time had slowed. The sizzling from the grill, the clinking of mugs, and the distant sound of traffic all faded into the background. All that mattered was the small space between Clara, the police, and the biker. The air was thick with tension, and Clara could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She took a deep breath and continued, her voice steady. "You want to talk to him? Fine, but you wait outside, not here. This is neutral ground." The officers exchanged glances. It was clear they hadn't expected a small diner owner to stand up to them, and certainly not with such confidence. One of them muttered something under his breath, frustration clear in his tone. But the rules were simple. No one wanted a scene. Not in front of witnesses, not with the diner full of people quietly watching. Finally, one of the officers stepped back and nodded. "Fine, but don't think this changes anything. We'll be back." With that, the police retreated, climbing back into their cars and speeding away down the road. The biker let out a low breath, shaking his head slightly. Clara looked at him, her expression softening. "You're safe for now. Just stay calm, okay?" He nodded, removing his leather gloves and running a hand over his face. I don't know what to say." "Thank you." His voice was low but genuine. Clara smiled, though she felt her own nerves still buzzing. "You don't have to say anything," she replied. "Just be careful." The diner was silent for a moment. The regulars had witnessed something extraordinary, though they weren't entirely sure what to make of it. Mr. Higgins' jaw was slightly dropped, and Mrs. Peters looked like she was holding back a gasp. Clara felt a mix of pride and anxiety. She had never done anything like this before, and yet something inside her had said it was the right thing. Ryder, the biker, took a seat at the counter, and Clara poured him a cup of coffee without a word. The two sat in silence for a few minutes, the tension slowly fading. He sipped the coffee, his eyes meeting hers occasionally. There was gratitude in his gaze, but also something more, a sense that Clara had stepped into a world she hadn't known existed and had done it without fear. "I've been in some rough spots," Ryder said finally, breaking the silence. "But you just stood up. You didn't flinch. That's not something you see often." Clara shrugged, trying to appear casual. "I run this place. If something's going to happen, it happens on my terms. That's all?" He smiled faintly, a mix of relief and respect in the curve of his lips. "Most people would have run. Most people would have hidden. You didn't." Clara felt a small warmth in her chest, a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes doing the right thing wasn't easy. But it mattered. She cleaned the counter with slow, deliberate motions, as if to remind herself that life continued even in moments of chaos. Outside, the world continued as normal, or as normal as it could be after an encounter like this. Cars passed by, birds chirped, and the morning sun climbed higher into the sky. But inside the diner, something had changed. Clara could feel it, subtle but undeniable. There was a shift in energy, a recognition that courage and humanity had collided in a small, unassuming place, and it had left a mark. Ryder finished his coffee, stood up, and placed a few bills on the counter. "I should go," he said, "but I won't forget this." Clara nodded. "Just take care of yourself out there." As he left, the bell above the door jingled, and Clara returned to her usual routine, flipping pancakes and pouring coffee, trying to shake the adrenaline from her system. But she knew that her morning, and perhaps her life, had shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. She had made a choice, and that choice had already set ripples into a world she had never fully understood. A world of motorcycles, brotherhood, and loyalty that ran deep. For the first time, Clara realized that courage wasn't always about fighting or shouting. Sometimes it was standing still, being firm, and protecting what you believed in. And sometimes that was enough to change everything. After the morning's tense events, Clara tried to return to the rhythm of her usual day. The diner smelled of fresh coffee, eggs sizzling on the grill, and the faint sweetness of syrup on pancakes. Yet something had changed. The usual calmness of the morning felt different. Every time she heard a car pass or a distant engine rumble, her heart skipped a beat. She kept telling herself it was just nerves, nothing more. But deep down, she knew the small act of standing up for Ryder had shifted something bigger than she could yet understand. The diner was quiet for a while, except for the soft chatter of regular customers who seemed to sense that something unusual had happened. Mr. Higgins was the first to speak. "Clara, that was brave," he said, almost whispering as if saying it louder would make it unbelievable. Clara smiled, though she felt uneasy. "It was just, I didn't want trouble in my diner," she said. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of her conscience. She didn't know if what she did was truly brave or just instinct. By afternoon, the news of her morning encounter had already started to spread through town. People whispered in small groups outside the diner, telling each other about the woman who had protected a Hell's Angel from police officers. Clara tried to stay focused on her work, but she noticed the extra looks, the curious glances, and the small smiles of recognition from strangers. Some seemed skeptical, others impressed, but everyone was talking. She had always known her diner had a reputation for good food and friendly service, but now it carried a new story, one of courage. Meanwhile, in the biker world, word traveled even faster. Messages were sent across biker networks, online forums, and personal contacts. "There's a woman at a diner on the edge of town." She stood up for Ryder. She didn't flinch. The word spread quickly, gaining attention from bikers who respected loyalty and courage above almost everything else. By evening, Clara had no idea how far her actions had reached. She was too busy cleaning tables, refilling coffee, and preparing for the dinner crowd to think about it much. That evening, Ryder returned briefly to the diner. This time he wasn't on his bike. He walked in casually, though Clara could see the weight of the day in his movements. He didn't seem dangerous now, just tired with a quiet intensity in his eyes. He nodded to Clara as she handed him a cup of coffee, and for a moment no words were necessary. "I just wanted to say thanks again," Ryder said softly, his voice low but firm. Most people would have called the cops themselves or run away. You didn't." Clara shook her head, smiling faintly. "It wasn't about heroics," she said. "I just wanted my diner to stay safe and calm. You weren't hurting anyone." Ryder nodded, but his eyes lingered on hers. "It takes more than courage to stand where you did," he said. "It takes understanding, too. You saw me as a person, not just a biker. That's where." Clara didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to being praised, especially by someone like him. She simply poured herself a cup of coffee and took a sip, feeling the warmth in her chest. After Ryder left, Clara tried to focus on her work, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. She noticed subtle signs outside the diner, a pair of headlights that lingered too long, a shadow moving past the window, a car parked nearby with its engine quietly running. She reminded herself to stay calm. She had protected someone today, yes, but she had done nothing wrong. There was nothing to fear, yet the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. That night, Clara sat in her small apartment above the diner, unable to sleep. The events of the day played over and over in her mind. She thought about Ryder, about the police, about the ripple her actions might have caused. She wondered what the bikers were thinking, what stories were being told about her courage. Part of her worried that trouble could come to her doorstep. Another part of her, surprisingly, felt a strange sense of pride. She had acted according to her principles, and that was something no one could take away. The next morning, Clara opened the diner as usual, hoping that today would be calm. She went through the motions, brewing coffee, flipping pancakes, straightening tables, but the feeling of anticipation never left. Then she noticed a pattern. A group of motorcycles rode past the diner slowly, glancing at the windows, engines rumbling quietly but deliberately. A few more passed, then a single rider slowed down in the parking lot, looked at her diner, and rode on. Clara's heart started to beat faster, not out of fear but from the growing awareness that her small act had consequences she could not yet predict. As the day went on, more signs appeared. People in town came in to ask questions, curious but cautious. Some had heard the story of Ryder and the diner, and their eyes carried a mixture of admiration and worry. Clara tried to answer politely, keeping her voice calm and her demeanor steady. She didn't want to create fear, but she also couldn't ignore that her life was changing. The diner was becoming something more than a place for breakfast and lunch. It was becoming a symbol, whether she liked it or not. By mid-afternoon, Clara's intuition proved right. A few bikers stopped by the diner, not in a threatening way, but in a manner that made it clear they had come for a reason. They parked their motorcycles neatly, removed their helmets, and stepped inside. Clara tensed at first, unsure of their intentions, but she quickly realized that they were not here to cause trouble. They were polite, almost careful, as if they had been told to respect the place and the person who had stood up for one of their own. Ryder arrived with them, nodding to Clara as he entered. "These people came to see you," he said quietly, almost with reverence. Clara blinked, unsure what to say. She had acted out of instinct, out of a sense of fairness, never imagining that it would lead to something like this. Yet here they were. Bikers she didn't know, showing respect in a way that felt both intimidating and oddly comforting. The bikers stayed for a while, sipping coffee and chatting quietly among themselves. Clara listened, observing their interactions, noticing moments of humor, kindness, and loyalty in their small gestures. It was a side of them she hadn't expected, the human side behind the rough exterior, the brotherhood that carried its own set of rules and values. She realized that her small act had touched something important to them, respect and honor. As the day drew to a close, Clara reflected on the unfolding events. She understood that her life was no longer quite the same. She had stepped into a story larger than herself, one that connected her to people she would never have met otherwise. And yet she felt a quiet strength growing within her. She had faced fear, spoken up, and held her ground. The ripple of that choice was only beginning, and she was determined to meet whatever came next with the same courage. By evening, the diner felt different. The air carried the faint hum of motorcycle engines in the distance, the laughter of bikers who had left yet remained in memory, and the warmth of people who had shown her that bravery could be recognized and respected. Clara cleaned the diner one last time before closing, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and anticipation. She knew that her actions had created connections, respect, and perhaps even loyalty in places she had never imagined. Sitting at her counter with a final cup of coffee, Clara thought about what tomorrow might bring. She knew that the bikers would continue to talk about her, that Ryder would likely return, and that the ripple of her courage could grow even larger. She also knew that she had changed. Her understanding of bravery, trust, and humanity had deepened in ways that would stay with her forever. And as the night settled over the quiet town, Clara felt a sense of quiet pride. She had done what she believed was right, faced her fears, and created something meaningful, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. The diner was no longer just a place to eat. It had become a stage for courage, a place where respect and humanity could cross boundaries that seemed impossible just hours before. Clara went to bed that night, with a mind full of questions and a heart that felt both heavy and light. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. Standing up for what was right, even in a small way, could change everything. And she was ready to face whatever came next. One day at a time, the morning started like any other, with Clara opening the diner, turning on the coffee machine, and letting the smell of fresh coffee drift into the quiet street. She hummed softly to herself as she arranged plates and wiped down the counters. The events of the past 2 days were still on her mind, but she had decided to focus on her routine. After all, the diner needed her attention. Yet a low, distant rumble in the distance made her pause. She looked out the window and saw a faint line of motorcycles on the horizon. At first, she thought it was just a few riders passing through. She had seen motorcycles go by all the time, but the rumble grew louder and more persistent. The engines synchronized in a way that made her stomach tighten. She stepped outside, squinting against the sunlight, and her eyes widened. It wasn't just a few motorcycles. It was hundreds. Engines roared like thunder, filling the quiet street with a vibration that rattled the windows of the diner. Riders in leather jackets stretched as far as she could see, 200 strong, all heading toward her diner. Clara's heart pounded. Her first instinct was fear. How could her small diner hold so many people? Would they be angry, aggressive, or dangerous? But as the line of motorcycles drew closer, she noticed something different. The riders were riding carefully, deliberately, keeping their formation neat. There was a sense of purpose in their movements, not chaos. Clara took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She reminded herself of Ryder's words: respect, loyalty, courage. Perhaps this was what he meant. The first riders arrived and parked their bikes outside. The roar of engines gradually died down as the remaining riders followed, circling the diner and lining up along the street. The scene was overwhelming. Leather jackets, helmets, patches gleaming in the sunlight, the smell of gasoline and leather filling the air. It was unlike anything Clara had ever witnessed. She felt a mix of awe, fear, and curiosity. For a moment, she just stood there, unsure of what to do. Ryder stepped forward from the crowd, removing his helmet. He gave Clara a small, reassuring smile. "It's okay," he said calmly. "They're here for you. You don't have to worry." Clara nodded slowly, still processing the enormity of what was happening. "For me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryder nodded. "You helped me when most people wouldn't. They respect that. They want to show you thanks and respect in their way." Clara hesitated but knew she couldn't back down. She opened the diner doors wide and motioned for them to enter. The first group stepped in carefully, removing their helmets, boots echoing on the wooden floor. The diners inside, regular customers who had been watching the unfolding scene, looked on in disbelief. Some whispered among themselves while others simply stared, unsure whether to leave or stay. Clara stood behind the counter, her heart racing but her stance firm. The bikers didn't rush, didn't push. They moved with a surprising politeness, guided by an unspoken code. Ryder spoke quietly to a few of them, and they nodded before approaching the counter. Clara offered coffee, and to her surprise, they accepted without hesitation. They asked for simple breakfasts, eggs, pancakes, toast, and she served them with the same care she always did. For a moment, the diner felt calm, almost normal, despite the incredible crowd. The hum of conversation grew. The bikers talked among themselves quietly, sometimes laughing softly. Clara noticed the way they looked at her, not with suspicion but with genuine respect. Ryder stepped closer, leaning on the counter. "Most people see bikers and think trouble," he said. "But we notice courage when we see it. You stood up for me when it mattered. That doesn't happen often." Clara smiled faintly, feeling a warmth that contrasted with the lingering fear in her chest. "I just did what I thought was right," she said. "I didn't expect anything in return." Ryder shook his head. "Most people don't. That's why they call it respect when it happens, and now they're here to show you that it matters." Outside, more motorcycles continued to arrive, though the first group had already filled the diner. Some stayed in the parking lot, sitting on their bikes and watching, while others mingled quietly, creating a calm energy that contrasted sharply with the roar of engines from moments before. Clara moved among them, refilling coffee cups, wiping tables, making small talk when she could. She noticed small acts of kindness. One biker helped a child move a chair, another handed a napkin to an elderly woman. It was human, simple, and unexpected. As the morning progressed, Clara realized that the bikers' presence wasn't just about thanks. It was a lesson in loyalty and respect. She had never seen a group so large move with such coordination, so much shared understanding. There was no shouting, no pushing, no chaos, only the quiet acknowledgement that her small act of courage had earned their admiration. Ryder took a seat near the counter and watched Clara work. "You handle this well," he said. "Most people would have panicked, but you treat people with respect no matter who they are. That's rare." Clara shrugged, though she felt a flush of pride. "I treat people how I want to be treated," she said simply. "That's all." The bikers began to share stories among themselves, sometimes loud enough for Clara to hear snippets. Tales of long rides, loyalty to friends, and facing danger on the road. Yet underneath it all, she noticed something. Despite their reputation, they valued honesty, respect, and courage. Her actions had aligned with their values, and that's why they were here. At one point, a young biker approached Clara hesitantly. "I just wanted to say thanks," he said. His voice was quiet, almost shy under the weight of his leather jacket and tough exterior. "You stood up for someone when it mattered. Not many people do that." Clara smiled, offering him a fresh cup of coffee. "You don't need to thank me," she said. "I just wanted to make sure no one got hurt." The young man nodded, a rare smile breaking across his face. By midday, the diner was bustling, but it was a different kind of busy. There was energy, but not tension. Laughter mixed with conversation, the clatter of dishes and the soft murmur of engines outside. Clara moved efficiently, flipping pancakes, pouring coffee, and serving food with a steady hand. She realized something important. Her small diner had become a place where fear could be replaced with understanding, where respect could cross boundaries that normally seemed impossible. Ryder stood at the doorway, watching the flow of people. He nodded approvingly. "You've done more than feed people," he said. "You've shown them what respect looks like. That's bigger than breakfast." Clara chuckled softly, feeling the weight of his words. She had never thought of herself as a leader or a hero. She had simply acted according to her principles, and yet the impact was undeniable. Outside, some bikers remained on their motorcycles, talking quietly, while others had gathered near the diner entrance. They weren't leaving. They were lingering, showing their presence in a calm but unmistakable way. Clara understood that this was part of their world, showing respect, loyalty, and acknowledgement without needing to announce it loudly. The afternoon passed with surprising ease. Clara noticed how people inside the diner had begun to relax, understanding that these bikers weren't there to cause harm. Even the regulars, who had been wary at first, now chatted quietly with the bikers, learning small details about their lives. It was a slow breaking down of barriers, a human connection forming in a place that had previously been just a stop for coffee and breakfast. By late afternoon, the diner felt full in a way that was almost overwhelming. Yet Clara didn't feel fear anymore, only a strange sense of pride and accomplishment. She had faced something larger than herself, and managed to hold space for humanity in an unexpected situation. Ryder approached her one last time before leaving. "You handled today well," he said. "You've earned their respect. Not everyone could do what you did." Clara nodded, tired but steady. "I just wanted to do the right thing," she said. "That's all?" Ryder smiled faintly. "Sometimes that's enough to change everything." As the last riders finally prepared to leave, engines roaring softly in the fading sunlight, Clara stood at the doorway and watched them go. She realized that her life had shifted in ways she hadn't imagined. Her diner was no longer just a quiet place for breakfast. It had become a symbol of courage, respect, and humanity. She had created a connection that crossed worlds, bridging the gap between ordinary life and a world most people feared. Clara cleaned up that evening, reflecting on what had just happened. She understood that the biker's visit wasn't just about showing thanks. It was about recognition of her character, her courage, and her fairness. The ripple effect of her small choice had created a lasting impact, one that would follow her and her diner for years to come. By nightfall, Clara sat behind the counter with a quiet cup of coffee, watching the street now empty except for a few distant headlights. The weight of the day pressed on her shoulders, but it was a good kind of weight, the kind that comes from knowing you did something meaningful. For the first time in a long time, she felt fully aware of her strength and her impact, understanding that courage could come in quiet moments and choices made calmly and firmly, and that those choices could change more than just one day. They could change lives. After the unforgettable morning when 200 bikers had arrived at her diner, Clara felt a strange mixture of relief and excitement. The diner had returned to a semblance of normalcy, yet something had changed. She could feel it in the air, in the way she moved through her small space, and even in the quiet moments before the first customer arrived each day. The bikers had left a mark, not just outside in the parking lot, but inside the hearts of those who witnessed their presence. Clara began her day as usual, brewing coffee and preparing pancakes, but she kept a careful watch on the street. She expected riders to return, maybe not all of them, but enough to remind her that the world she had briefly entered was still connected to her life. Sure enough, by mid-morning, a group of bikers appeared, this time smaller and less intimidating, though their presence was still noticeable. They parked neatly and stepped inside, removing their helmets and leather gloves with respect. Ryder arrived shortly after, as calm and composed as ever. He gave Clara a nod, silently letting her know that she was not alone. Clara felt a quiet reassurance, understanding that this visit wasn't about chaos or trouble. It was about respect and trust, a world she hadn't known she could be part of, simply because she had acted with courage and fairness. The bikers began to order breakfast, taking seats at the counter and at tables. Clara noticed the subtle ways they interacted, sharing small jokes quietly, offering food to someone next to them, checking in on each other. These were people who lived with intense rules of loyalty and brotherhood, yet here they were gentle, considerate, and surprisingly human. Clara found herself smiling more freely, realizing that her initial fear had given way to curiosity and understanding. Ryder leaned against the counter and spoke softly. "They're here because they trust you now," he said. "Not just me, but all of them. You've proven yourself in a way that matters to us." Clara cleaned a table, her hands busy but her mind absorbing his words. "I don't know if I've done anything special," she said. I wanted everyone to be safe." Ryder shook his head. "You don't see it that way, but that's exactly why it matters. You didn't think about yourself. You acted for others, and that's rare." The bikers stayed for hours, not as a single overwhelming crowd this time, but in smaller groups that trickled in throughout the day. Clara began to recognize a few of the regular faces, men and women who shared meals quietly, laughed when it felt natural, and respected her space. She noticed something extraordinary. These people, often feared by the town and misunderstood, were capable of deep loyalty, honesty, and kindness. She realized that her diner had become more than just a place to eat. It had become a neutral ground, a place where trust could be built even between very different worlds. Some of the bikers began to open up to her. They told her small pieces of their lives, the long rides across states, the hardships they faced on the road, the strict codes of their clubs, and the sense of family that came with being part of the brotherhood. Clara listened carefully, pouring coffee and nodding, never judging, never interrupting. Her ability to listen quietly became her strength. And in return, the bikers trusted her more. They shared stories that would never have reached the ears of ordinary townspeople, revealing vulnerability behind the tough exteriors. One young biker, no more than 25, sat across from her during a quiet lull. "Most people see us as trouble," he said softly, stirring his coffee. "They don't see people. But you did. That's different. Clara smiled warmly. I just try to treat everyone how I want to be treated, she replied. Sometimes that's all it takes. The young man nodded as if understanding something he hadn't realized before. You're right. That's all it takes, he repeated. As the days passed, the bikers began to make the diner a regular stop. Clara established a simple set of rules. Respect the diner, respect the people, and no illegal activities inside. The bikers followed them without question. She realized that they were not used to being treated with fairness and trust, but when they were, they responded in kind. She saw it in their gestures, the quiet way they held the doors for others, the small smiles they offered, the moments when they helped without being asked. Clara also noticed how the local townspeople were beginning to change. Some who had initially watched in fear now came in, curious about the bikers' visits. They saw the polite, calm behavior of the riders and the respectful way Clara interacted with them. Prejudices that had lingered for years began to fade, replaced with understanding and cautious admiration. Her diner had become a bridge, connecting people who would never have met under ordinary circumstances. Ryder returned frequently, always offering reassurance and guidance. He respected Clara's space, never overstepping, and sometimes helped by talking quietly to the bikers to reinforce the diner's rules. They need to understand this place is yours, he told her once. They respect you because you've shown courage and fairness. Don't ever forget that. Clara nodded, realizing that her confidence had grown alongside the respect she had earned. Through these interactions, Clara also grew personally. She learned how to navigate delicate situations, how to speak with firmness without hostility, and how to manage fear when faced with the unknown. The bikers were teaching her just as much as she was teaching them, though neither side might have recognized it at first. It was a quiet exchange of trust, an unspoken agreement that respect could cross boundaries when handled with care. Sometimes the bikers would linger outside the diner after closing, talking quietly, repairing motorcycles, or simply sitting together in the fading light. Clara often stepped outside to offer a drink or a simple word, and the conversations that followed were surprisingly human. They spoke about family, about the challenges of life on the road, about dreams and disappointments. Clara realized that beneath the leather jackets and tough exterior were people who, like everyone else, longed for understanding and connection. One evening, Ryder approached Clara as she was locking up the diner. You've changed something here, he said quietly. Not just the bikers, but the town too. People are seeing things differently because of you. Clara blinked, unsure what to say. I didn't mean to. I just did what felt right, she said. Ryder smiled faintly. Sometimes that's enough. That's all it ever needs to be. People notice courage, and respect follows. You've got both. The trust that had developed between Clara and the bikers grew stronger each day. They began to treat her diner as a safe space, one where they could rest, eat, and share their stories without fear of judgment. Clara watched as men and women who were often misunderstood demonstrated kindness, loyalty, and patience in simple ways, holding doors, sharing food, helping someone lift a chair. She realized that her small act of courage had created a ripple effect, teaching others about fairness, trust, and the importance of human connection. Clara also reflected on herself. She felt more confident, more aware of her strength, and more connected to the world beyond the small town. She had stood up for someone when it mattered, and in return she had been given lessons in trust, understanding, and loyalty. The bikers, in turn, had learned that courage and respect could exist outside their world, that a single act of fairness could earn trust even in unexpected places. As the days turned into weeks, the diner became a hub of unusual harmony. Locals, bikers, and travelers alike visited, sharing meals and stories, slowly learning to coexist with mutual respect. Clara's presence remained steady, guiding the flow, maintaining rules, and ensuring that her diner remained a safe space for everyone. The bikers came and went, always polite, always loyal, always remembering that this small diner had become more than just a stop. It was a place where respect and courage mattered more than reputation or fear. Through it all, Clara discovered a simple truth. Human connections built on fairness and trust could bridge even the widest gaps. She saw it in the way bikers treated one another, in the way the town began to view them differently, and in the quiet moments when someone offered a small act of kindness without needing acknowledgement. Her diner had become more than a business. It had become a symbol, a place where courage and understanding could coexist in a way that felt natural and human. And every night when the last customer had left and the lights were dimmed, Clara would sit behind the counter with a cup of coffee, reflecting on how far things had come. She knew the bikers would always be a part of her life now, and in return, she had become a part of theirs. It was an unexpected, unplanned connection, but one that had grown into something real and meaningful. She realized that by standing up for what was right, she had created trust, respect, and a sense of belonging that would last long after the engines had faded into the distance. The days after the bikers' first visit settled into a strange but comfortable rhythm for Clara. Her diner, once just a quiet spot for locals and travelers, had become something more, a meeting place, a neutral ground, a symbol of courage and respect. She never imagined that one small act of standing up for Ryder would ripple into something so meaningful, touching so many lives, including her own. Yet, as she brewed her morning coffee and arranged plates, she understood that life had shifted in ways that could not be undone. By mid-morning, a few familiar motorcycles rumbled past the diner. Clara glanced out the window, smiling faintly. She knew many of these riders would stop in soon, drawn not just by food, but by respect, trust, and curiosity. Today felt different, though. The town had begun to notice, too. People whispered about the diner and the woman who had stood up for a Hell's Angel. Some were skeptical, some admiring, but all recognized that something remarkable had happened. Clara poured coffee for her. Early customers while keeping an eye on the street, her mind alert, but calm. Ryder arrived as expected, nodding politely to Clara before taking a seat at the counter. "They'll be here," he said quietly, his voice low but steady. Clara smiled softly. She had come to trust Ryder's judgment. If he said the bikers were coming, then she knew they would arrive in a way that respected the diner and her space. "I'm ready," she replied, trying to keep her voice casual, even as her heart carried a mix of excitement and anticipation. By mid-morning, the motorcycles began to arrive in groups. The rumble of engines, which once would have made her nervous, now sounded familiar, a signal of connection and respect. The riders parked in neat lines, removed their helmets, and stepped inside, careful to move with calm and courtesy. Clara greeted them all with her usual warmth, offering coffee and meals, and quietly observing how they treated one another and her diner. She noticed small gestures, a biker helping another adjust a chair, a shared laugh over pancakes, a quiet nod of appreciation when she refilled a coffee cup. Ryder leaned against the counter and spoke quietly. "They're here because of you," he said. "You've earned their respect, not just mine but all of theirs. That's why they return." Clara paused, pouring a fresh cup of coffee. "I didn't expect any of this," she admitted softly. "I just wanted to do what was right." Ryder shook his head with a faint smile. "Sometimes that's enough. That's all it ever needs to be. People notice courage and fairness, and respect follows naturally. You've got both." The bikers stayed longer this time. Clara found herself listening more than talking, observing the quiet ways they built connections among themselves and with her. They shared stories about their lives on the road, the challenges of long rides, loyalty to family and club, and moments of kindness in a world that often misunderstood them. Clara learned that beneath the leather jackets and tough exterior were people who valued honesty, courage, and fairness. Her diner had become a place where those values could exist without judgment. Some bikers opened up about their pasts. One older man spoke quietly about losing family and finding connection through the club. A young woman shared how the road had given her freedom but also loneliness. Clara listened carefully, offering words of understanding and small gestures of kindness, like refilling their drinks or bringing extra plates of food. She realized that her role was more than serving meals. She was creating a space where people could be human, vulnerable, and respected. The town, too, was beginning to notice the change. Local residents who once feared the bikers now saw them differently. They,